from Washington, D.C.
To our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to a special edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew on Capitol Hill alongside Kaylee Lyons from our D.C. Bureau. Tonight, it's boom or bust for the president's long-promised tax bill in the Senate.
Today I signed this bill into law. Almost every major promise made in the 2024 campaign already will have become a promise kept.
I'm confident that the bill is going to progress as is over the next few hours, and it'll be on the president's desk to sign on July 4th.
If Senate Republicans won't tell the American people what's in this bill, then Democrats are going to force this chamber to read it from start to finish.
Mr. President, can Congress finish this by July 4th?
We hope so.
We're live from Washington, bringing you interviews with some of the country's leading lawmakers as the Senate passes hour 7 of their marathon voting session, all in a bid to meet the president's July 4th deadline. We're covering every angle for you tonight, from the provisions that could be cut to those expected to survive, plus what the administration is offering to get conservative opponents on board, and the one Republican senator who became a political casualty over the bill.
What we're doing, because we've got a view on an artificial deadline on July 4th that means nothing but another date and time. We can take the time to get this right. If there's no negative impact, what's wrong with daylight? What's wrong with actually understanding what this bill does?
And we begin on Capitol Hill with the so-called vote-a-rama that's happening right now on the Senate floor. Just a short Capitol subway ride from where I am right now in the Russell Senate office building, as senators work furiously throughout the day and likely into the night, possibly till tomorrow, to get a final vote on the president's one big beautiful bill. We're joined now by Bloomberg's Erik Wasson, who's been up here all day and talking with lawmakers. Erik, thanks for being here. The vote-a-rama is actually a chance for Democrats to have a say, possibly, in this process. How many hours will this go on for? How many amendments might actually be passed, if any?
You know, I'm hearing it will go till about dawn on Tuesday. It doesn't seem like Democratic amendments will pass, but it is a chance for them to highlight the divisions among Republicans, specifically on issues like rural hospital cuts that have been a real concern to Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and other possible defectors on this bill. We're also looking very closely at Republican amendments. One thing that's very important for investors is the cuts to wind and solar power tax credits that have really affected solar company stocks. We know that Joni Ernst, Lisa Murkowski, others are working on an amendment to sort of phase those tax credits out in a longer way, to give projects already in the pipeline a chance to benefit, and the banks that have financed those projects a chance to benefit from the tax credits. We're looking at that. We're looking at Susan Collins trying to raise taxes on people making more than $25 million a year, something that she says is a top priority. Just caught up with her a few minutes ago, and she said she's still leaning no on the bill until she gets some of these changes.
Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, also up with an amendment that would further cut Medicaid and get back to some of the state reimbursements introduced for expansion states during Obamacare. Does that have a chance? Because we're hearing from a lot of Republican House members who are pretty worried about that. Yeah,
so the Rick Scott amendment was a key to getting the bill on the floor. Rick Scott, Cynthia Lummis, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson, they're all a part of this conservative bloc that really want to see deeper cuts to Medicaid. There's a new study out from Democrats saying 20 million people could lose their health care under Obamacare if this passes, which is aimed at saving $350 billion. My sense is that that amendment will not actually pass. It was offered by leadership. Leader Thune told me he will vote for it, but he can't guarantee that it will pass. What Rick Scott then does and his group then does, if it fails, it remains an open question. Rick Scott would not answer that question when I asked it. Others in that group have also sidestepped it.
Fascinating. One last one for you. Talk of a wraparound amendment that would come at the end of the vote-a-rama, a Republican amendment, Erik, that would essentially move this back closer to the House version of this bill and undo a lot of what we're seeing right now. Is that how this ends?
It could. There is usually a wraparound amendment just in case there were any political changes during vote-a-rama that some members felt they had to do, that to take those back out, to make technical fixes to the bill. The House Conservative Freedom Caucus is really looking to change this bill to make deeper cuts. But remember, that's going to cause people like Susan Collins to possibly vote no. So it's going to be a really tough balance for John Thune. He's got to do that in the next couple hours.
Fascinating. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson with a real-time update here on Capitol Hill. We thank you, Erik. This morning on Bloomberg TV and radio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent shared his own expectations for when this tax bill will be on the president's desk.
I'm confident that the bill is going to progress as is over the next few hours, and it'll be on the the president's desk to sign on July 4th. So the Senate will vote, pass it over to the House. We've seen incredible leadership, and this is what leadership looks like.
Now to discuss the White House's expectations surrounding this bill, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard is here with me live in our Washington bureau. So, Mike, it was just last week on Friday where President Trump suggested July 4th was not the end all, then went on to pressure lawmakers to make sure this passes by Independence Day. How much should we expect him to be involved in the arm twisting here in order to meet his deadline?
Well, we saw quite clear public evidence of this arm twisting over the weekend when he went after Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, who had objected to some of the Medicaid cuts that Erik Wasson was just talking about. And what did that get him? That got him the threat of a primary challenge by Trump. He would back somebody, Mark Robinson, in North Carolina against Tillis. And it was strong enough that Tillis decided to announce his plans to retire from the Senate. And that's a signal to other Republican senators who may be on the fence, as well as House members who are going to have to vote on this package once more before it gets to Trump's desk, that if they stand in the president's way, they may pay a price for it. And yet we do see, as Erik outlined for us so helpfully, the signs that not everything is united within the GOP caucus right now. And there are a lot of differences, both on the moderate side, concern over some of the health safety net programs, but also on the conservative side, the actual size and expense of this package. So the president will have to do a lot of work over the next, I don't know how many hours. Erik was saying it could go till dawn, really burning up the phone lines, trying to get at least 5 of those 8 holdouts that we've identified on the Republican side, Kayleigh.
Well, and as you point out, concerns over cost, that obviously factors into ultimately the debt and deficit of the United States. And the president, of course, is thinking about interest costs when he continually puts pressure on the Federal Reserve. In fact, earlier today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt detailed a note that President Trump penned to the Fed chair, Jerome Powell.
The president sent this note to the Fed chair. It says, Jerome, you are as usual too late. You have cost the USA a fortune and continue to do so. You should lower the rate by a lot. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being lost and there is no inflation.
And he actually showed on this chart essentially of global central banks rates, Mike, where he would like the rate to be. It's a whole lot lower.
It's a whole lot lower, really among the lowest charged by central banks anywhere in the world, and multiple percentage points lower than where we are right now. And Kayleigh, there really is, as you identified, a nexus between what we're seeing on Capitol Hill right now in this debate over the tax package and the president's concern over borrowing costs and interest rates, because as we have seen now, borrowing costs are one of the biggest budget items now for the federal government. It is the fastest growing area of federal spending, and it's one now that annually outstrips what goes into U.S. government defense and national security programs. So it's a huge concern, and the president, he's a real estate guy. He understands to the core what borrowing costs can mean for his agenda. And in this case, he is seeing it potentially weighing not only on the cost of this package in the long run, but also perhaps weighing on the economy as well. And yet, from Jerome Powell's perspective, he has another pillar of the president's economic agenda to worry about, and that is tariffs, which the Fed has identified as potentially a risk for inflation and therefore a reason to either maintain interest rates where they are or raise them even further if there is truly a spike in prices, Kayleigh.
All right, Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, thank you so much. Of course, it's not just President Trump and Jerome Powell who are thinking about the debt and deficit. That's also an argument that Democratic senators are making against this legislative package. Here's a few of them on the floor of the Senate yesterday.
If the bill and the cuts included in the bill indeed reduce the deficit, as they claim it does, they wouldn't have needed to raise the debt limit in the process.
It also drives $4 trillion in debt. It used to be 3.4. Now it's up to $4 trillion.
We know what the math is. Everybody in this room knows the deficit is far worse today than it was when Donald Trump passed those tax cuts.
I don't want to hear any more from my colleagues about deficits. I don't want to hear any more crocodile tears about deficits. We're mortgaging our future.
And joining me now live on Capitol Hill with his reaction to this tax bill still evolving before our eyes, Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. It's great to see you, Senator. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You've been through a couple of these. This one's a little different. Vote-a-rama in the light of day. What's the
I know. Well, it's like, you know, oh my gosh,
strategy?
people are going to see what we do or not do.
So this is the sausage being made.
But this is the sausage.
Do you expect a floor vote in the next 24 hours?
Yeah, I think in the next 24 hours. I'm hoping in the next 12 hours.
Okay.
But don't take my word for it.
Understood.
You know, and this is I can't think of a bill that I've worked on since I've been here that the more people see, the more they dislike it. You just heard my colleagues talk about adding $4 trillion to the debt, cutting $1 trillion out of health care, basically throwing 16 million people off of health insurance. We're going to basically take the numbers of uninsured back to where they were before Obamacare. And all of those people flooding the emergency room, it's going to blow up rates for everybody. I think this bill's got a heap of problems that, and one of the reasons why I think Jay Powell, I saw the earlier clip there, is trying to keep, not preliminarily cut interest rates, because I think it's going to have, this combined with the tariffs are going to have an inflationary effect.
Well, so here we are. Vote-a-rama, I guess at some point will begin. This has been quite a long day already. This is Democrats' chance to have a voice, presumably. Can you make changes to this bill, or is this just noise? You get to slow things down.
I'd like to see, I've never seen anything this outrageous, but both teams have done it, you know, when they have a trifecta.
Sure.
Maybe a reason why the American voters should be careful about giving one party complete control. But I think there are huge problems. The Republicans have their people who want to cut more versus some of the more moderates who want to not see these kind of health care cuts. And now there's an issue that has evolved that may get a lot, this feels like it could also derail the bill, where a number of Republicans are saying, hey, before we cut back more energy production in this country on solar and wind, batteries, we should maybe not phase out those clean energy tax credits as quickly. Which to me, when people have literally spent billions to start these projects and now pull the rug out in terms of tax support, I mean, I was a business guy for a lot longer than I've been a politician. That's not a good business plan.
Well, let's talk about that particular issue. There's actually a Republican bill, an amendment that would slow down the ending of these green incentives. Could you sign on to something like that, or say Senator Collins' amendment to create a new millionaire tax to pay for rural hospitals?
I will vote for those.
So there are Republican amendments you're a yes on here today.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the clean energy, slowing it down. Why would, I'm an all of the above energy guy. I think we need, natural gas. I think we need all the clean. I'm a big advocate for nuclear. But the idea that we should curtail any of our energy generation, because if one thing we know, Joe, it's who wins the AI battle is not going to be simply who has the most data or compute. It's going to be who has the most power. And America be abundant in power. And on the question of...
You happen to represent a state that's the data center capital of America.
And I can tell you, if we don't find that additional energy, we're not going to be able to fuel all or power all those. And then on Medicaid, this is a travesty what's going to happen to rural hospitals.
Rick
I think
Scott wants to cut it further.
Well,
is that amendment possible to pass?
I cannot imagine any way that he'll be able to get the votes, because there's so many Republicans that won't want to cut it further. But, I feel like there is this push and pull here. And at the same time, Leader Thune has got to try to get a product that could actually still then pass the House. I mean, this is what happens. I wish they would have taken a little more time. Now, at the end of the day, the fact they asked for no Democratic input, I'd probably still be against it, but I've never seen one where they're making it up on the floor as they go along as quickly as this time.
Yeah, now, does Leader Thune actually bring this a lot closer to the House version in a wraparound amendment sometime in the wee hours of the morning? That's what we're hearing.
That could be the case.
Then how do these senators make decisions to vote yes when they know it's going to change?
Exactly, that's the question. Are you going to be so hypocritical that you say, all right, I got my amendment in, and then at the end it got yanked out, but I'm still voting for the bill?
How about that?
That will be
So you found yourself in agreement tonight with Tom Tillis and Elon Musk. How does that feel?
Well, I mean, I actually used to work with Elon a dozen plus years ago. He did a great job breaking into the kind of monopoly we had on space. And Tom Tillis and I have worked together on a whole host of projects over the years. I mean, I would remind you and the viewers, that anything that's happened in the last 5 years, from the green energy to the infrastructure bill to the CHIPS bill, even the final COVID relief under Trump, that was all done with a group of bipartisan senators. My concern is they're dropping like flies, and particularly on, we lost Manchin and Sinema last time. We're losing Tillis. We lost Mitt Romney, Rob Portman. So that group of us that are still trying to get to yes on bills, unfortunately, seems to be diminishing.
How about that? So, therefore, you look ahead to the midterms. Is this the narrative you need to take back the Senate?
Well, the Senate's going to be a bigger hurdle. I know that's not my talking point, but just the way the map works out.
Well, that's right.
But I think there will be...
You see the House flipping.
Yeah, I see the House flipping. And I see the Senate potentially getting up to 48, 49. Even at 50, they would still have control because of the vice president. And I think it's, I go back to where we started the conversation. When you give one team exclusive control, particularly when you've got somebody like President Trump who's so willing to kind of break down all norms, I think the American people wanted this guy to lower prices and not have this level of chaos. He's not lowered prices, and I've never been in a circumstance where it's been this chaotic. And we haven't even got to what's happening in foreign policy, where so many of our allies are very concerned.
You mentioned the vice president. Should J.D. Vance not go to bed early tonight?
I don't think any of us are going to bed early tonight.
But he might need to come break a tie.
I think, yes. I could very easily see a scenario where it's 50-50. And again, Kamala Harris had to do the same, so I'm not throwing stones on that.
This has become a recurring event here recently. It's great to see you, Senator.
Thank you, Jeff.
I hope you're not up all night, but I know it wouldn't be your first time. Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia with us on Balance of Power live from Capitol Hill. We thank you. Earlier today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt talked about the importance of not only securing enough votes from the Senate for this bill, but also from the House. Take a listen.
The president is very well aware that this bill needs to not only pass out of the Senate, but it needs to go back to the House. And we need the full weight of the Republican conference to get behind this bill. And we expect them to, and we are confident that they will. The president has been working hand in hand with Senate Majority Leader Thune and also our House Republican leader, or the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
And joining us now for more on the House's view, live from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York, is Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York. Welcome back, Congresswoman, to Bloomberg TV and radio. Have you heard yet from leadership when you'll be expected back in Washington?
Yeah, we're expected back tomorrow evening, and with a potential vote as early as Wednesday at 9 a.m. Obviously, everything is fluid right now, pending on what the Senate does. But we are having just ongoing discussions between the House, our leadership, the White House, and many of the secretaries that serve the president. And so this is all, still a work in progress, but I think we're getting there. We're building the consensus necessary to get the job done.
Well, as that work progresses, with the changes you are seeing in the Senate, how much steeper is the climb going to be to get this passed in the House, as we consider that there were you and other colleagues who had expressed concerns about Medicaid cuts from the jump, and you have plenty of more fiscally conservative colleagues who are concerned that the spending cuts don't go deep enough. How will the votes ultimately get there?
And look, we believe strongly that the version that came out of the House was the way to go, that we had a balanced policies in terms of tax, supporting middle class, supporting our economy with pro-growth, pro-jobs policies. A lot of that still remains the same in the Senate bill. On the Medicaid side, obviously, we're still waiting to see what the final product looks like, because there are some changes, not drastic changes. There's some small changes that the Senate is making, but obviously we want to wait until the bill completely passes to see which amendments finally made it in, so we can all make a determination on how that will impact our districts. In the meantime, we're talking to stakeholders. We're speaking with our leadership about the things that we're seeing pop up. Look, at the end of the day, we need to stick to the mission here of providing pro-growth, pro-jobs policy, supporting our working Americans, middle class, and senior citizens, and making sure that we preserve Medicaid for the most vulnerable, those with disabilities, our seniors, children, and those who currently qualify for that. We support work requirements. That is a reasonable ask. That is one of the big components of this, and it's in there. And so there's some other things that are being discussed, whether it's a provider tax on medical facilities and some other components that we're still not sure exactly which way the Senate's going to go. But that's where I think the sticking points are right now. And as was mentioned earlier, the energy tax credits.
Well, Congresswoman, specifically Senator Rick Scott's amendment that would phase out the federal cost sharing for Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. If that were to get attached to this legislation, would that be a deal breaker for you?
I think a lot of members are looking at that one very hard. The reality is that we pay 50% federal match for traditional Medicaid recipients, the people who it's intended for, our seniors, our disabled, our most vulnerable citizens. And yet on the expansion side, the federal government is picking 90% of the share. So I think what Senator Scott is saying is that the state needs to have a little more skin in the game. They have no incentive to root out the fraud and the waste on the state level. They have no incentive to ensure these dollars are not getting to illegal immigrants. And so I don't necessarily support his amendment, but I think the idea of what he's trying to accomplish here is worth taking a closer look at. Because at the end of the day, why is the federal government paying 90% for individuals who are young, healthy, no children, and can work, yet only 50% when it comes to our most vulnerable that the program was intended for? And so this is the problem of why the Medicaid has cost so much and has gone so explosive that it's bankrupting the system. And so you won't have the funds there for the actual individuals that it was intended for in the first place.
Congresswoman, of course, as you're joining us from your district in New York, I also have to ask you about the SALT cap, as a deal was struck last week that your colleague from New York, Republican Congressman Mike Lawler, had a hand in negotiating. This is what he told us when he joined us about the agreement.
Ultimately, you know, while it's not 10 years, it's 5 years. The fact is, it is a 4x increase on the current SALT cap and provides real tax relief to middle class and working class families all across this country. In my district, 90+% of my constituents will be able to fully deduct their state and local taxes under this deal, and it keeps the House framework intact. So I think it's a big win. I think it's a strong agreement that ultimately will have the support to get across the finish line.
Congresswoman, as you consider the rest of your colleagues in the New York delegation, like, for example, Congressman Nick Lalotta, who have suggested this deal is not workable for him, are you expecting ultimately that you all, this is a deal that you all can support, that will be enough?
Yeah, look, I think the New Yorkers need to stick together here. We fought very hard to get to where we are. This is significant relief for middle-class families that we represent. 98% of my district will be covered by this. And I worked very hard to convince my non-SALT, or like I like to say, low-sodium colleagues from other states on the Ways and Means Committee to support SALT relief. And so this is significant for the people I represent. And when you add in the bonus deduction for seniors, $6,000 per senior, depending on their income, this is huge relief for the people of Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn. And not to mention for the businesses, you know, the corporate SALT, which was really big for both property and income taxes, that's preserved, as well as the pass-through entity tax. That's preserved. So we will see small businesses and medium-sized businesses and larger businesses, which are really critical to New York's economy and the country, benefit from this. They will not be hurt by any changes. But most importantly for the middle class, we keep out the alternative minimum tax. That will not return. The standard deduction, child deduction will remain double. And across the board, personal and corporate tax rates will now be made permanent. So this is huge. And when we talk about the debt, as was mentioned earlier, what they're not considering is how this is pro-growth policy that will bring in revenue. It's going to bring in revenue that will help reduce our debt.
Congressman, finally, as we consider you and your colleagues in the New York delegation, obviously, by and large, New Yorkers, Republicans are seen as majority makers. We just heard from Democratic Senator Mark Warner that his expectation is the House will be lost to Republicans in 2026. How do you course correct on messaging to make sure that that doesn't happen, knowing this bill is polling unpopularly?
Well, I think there's a lot of fear-mongering, misinformation coming from the Democrats. When we pass this bill and it is signed into law, we will go out there and explain to the American people what we've done. And also, they will see for themselves. Look, in a year, they will see how the economy is stronger, energy is more affordable, how nobody truly got kicked off of Medicaid. The only thing in there is that work requirement, which is very reasonable, 20 hours a week to work, to volunteer, work, or learn. All the eligibility stays the same. We're just asking able-bodied individuals to work part-time, just like every other American works for their health insurance. So what I would say is in time, people will see that we were right and that we were honest about what was in this bill. They'll see the benefits, and I think that we will get reelected. And they got to remember this. Do they want to go back to the open borders, to the migrant crisis, from gang members, drug traffickers wreaking havoc on the streets of New York City and cities across America? Do they want to go back to all the crazy, chaotic policies of the Biden administration? I don't think so. And so I think, when you see it in contrast, I think that Republicans will secure the votes of the American people because we will proven to have done the job, and the commitments that we made were fulfilled.
All right, Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis joining us from her district in New York. Thank you so much. And now we turn back to Joe Matthew on Capitol Hill.
All right, Kaylee, thank you so much. With us now live on the Hill is Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, who was kind enough to step off the floor and talk to us here as we wind up to the big vote-a-rama. Senator, it's great to see you. We should let everyone know that you're not only a senator, but you're a physician as well. And before you came here to the Senate, you were chairman of the board of the Great Bend Regional Hospital. So you bring unique perspective when it comes to this argument over Medicaid funding for rural hospitals, the provider tax, and this has all changed a lot in the last couple of weeks. There's an amendment, in fact, to cut Medicaid spending even further here. How is this going to come out in the wash at the end of this vote-a-rama? And as a doctor, what's right for the country?
So at the end of the day, our bill is going to strengthen Medicaid. We're going to preserve and protect it for those who need it the most, for seniors in nursing homes, for people with disabilities, for pregnant women. Half of the women that I delivered were on Medicaid, believe it or not. So we think that we're protecting Medicaid for those who need it the very, very, very most. I think, economically, we're going to be spending more on Medicaid. We're going to be increasing spending in this bill at a rate higher than inflation to the tune of $200 billion over a year's time.
Well, that's interesting, because a lot of people hear that you're cutting Medicaid.
Yeah, only in Washington,
D.C.
understand.
Is it because the argument is you're making it more efficient?
Yeah.
That there's a work requirement, that you're not taking anyone who needs Medicaid off the rolls.
Yeah. So the CBO scores things, and they are increasing Medicaid exponentially. Look, we've spent 50% more on Medicaid today than we were 5 years ago. So the CBO assumes we're going to keep doing that type of escalation. This will basically slow the increase. But look, I want to talk a second about the 7 million healthy men out there that are not working. 7 million healthy working age men that are not working. What our bill does is gets them off Medicaid, hopefully, and gets them into a job. All they have to do is work 20 hours a week, volunteer, go to school. Back home, people are harvesting wheat right now. They're working 20 hours in a day. I think having a job brings dignity and purpose to a person's life. So many people with depression, it'd be good for them to go back and get a job or education, and I want to help them do that.
Your colleague from Maine, Susan Collins, has a way around some of the concerns when it comes specifically to rural hospitals, and this is where your expertise comes in. She says double the funding for rural hospitals and then create a new tax bracket for people who make more than $25 million a year. Is there enough money there to pay for it? Would you vote yes?
I will, first of all.
Okay.
And so right now, this bill has $25 billion of funding for rural hospitals. There are 1,400 critical access hospitals out there. That funding amounts to about $17 million per hospital. That would be more than enough to help them for the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
I want to include community health centers. I'm really big into MAHA, Making America Healthy Again. One of my pillars is making sure everybody has meaningful, affordable access to health care. I think community health centers are part of the answer. I love what Susan Collins is doing, her leadership in this, and I really think this will help turn America's health around.
Well, this is really interesting because we've isolated in our first half hour live here on Capitol Hill, speaking with yourself and Mark Warner from Virginia, a Democrat, an area of common ground. This is going to pass with Democrats and Republicans, it sounds like.
Yeah.
This specific amendment.
I sure hope so. I mean, some of us will have heartburn. Basically, what we're doing with the Trump tax cuts is letting that run out on the billionaire, so to speak.
Understood.
And I just think that that's a great way to pay for this, making sure, again, our goal is everyone has meaningful access to health care. This is one way to do it. Medicaid's not the solution, though. Only about 5% of Medicaid dollars end up with rural hospitals. Urban hospitals benefit from the Medicaid. Rural hospitals, not so much. They're more dependent upon Medicare. Our bill strengthens Medicaid Medicaid for those who needs it the most and helps rural hospitals.
We've only got about a minute left. What do you expect tonight? Are you up all night? You vote in the wee hours? When do we get a floor vote?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let's put the over-under at 10 a.m. tomorrow. How's that sound? Okay. We'll see when they all run out of juice. But I would just say this. Look at the floor. Look at the body language on people. The Democrats look like they're at a funeral, that they're at a morgue. The Republicans have a hop in their step. This is the start of a new golden era for America, and we're so proud to be part of it.
Well, you know, it's interesting as well that the idea some of these changes you're voting on could be cranked back through a wraparound amendment at the end of Vote-A-Rama. And frequently, this is a very wonky procedural thing, but it could be a big deal tonight if that happens. Do you expect that's how this ends?
You know, I don't know. I think we have to wait and see what amendments pass or not, and I have confidence that Leader Thune will be in consultation with President Trump, Speaker Johnson, the three of them will make the play, and then we got to run the ball as fast as we can.
But you're not worried about undoing what's being done now. It does seem to be kind of a strange process when you guys are here for hours voting on uncounted amendments only to see it worked back into something similar to a House version. Is the fear that the House can't take what you're doing right now, that it would fail next door?
I don't think it'll go back to a House version, but I think that some of these amendments may go and not. As I understand, the last time that we did with the Democrats, that they did some type of a wraparound vote because they didn't like some of the amendments. Sure. So I think the next step of this play is let's see where these amendments go and make those decisions. But regardless, at the end of the day, we got to get this bill across the finish line. If you support President Trump, you support this bill. This funds his agenda for the next 4 years, makes our border secure, helps our military out, and decreases your taxes and increases your income by a tune of about $1,000 a month for hardworking middle-class Americans.
Your answer then to those like Tom Tillis and even Elon Musk, who say this is a debt bomb, that we're adding too much to the debt and deficit for the next generation?
You know, I believe that lowering taxes grows the economy. It worked for President John F. Kennedy. It worked for President Reagan. It worked in Trump 45. I believe in Trump 47. Lowering taxes, rolling back regulations is going to grow the economy. I'm going to predict the start of a new golden era, GDP 3 to 4% on a consistent basis, and I'm just so proud to be part of it.
And that keeps us from adding to the debt if you see that kind of growth.
Yeah, if the economy is growing like that, then that means more taxes going back into the system. You know, those 7 million people that aren't working right now, get them back to work and let's get them paying into Medicare and Social Security. That's how we grow. We're going to grow ourselves out of it. Now, we've got a spending problem. We'll come back and talk about the spending problem, but certainly President Trump wants to work on the spending part of this as well. We're trying to freeze the spending, trying to grow the economy.
You get that much revenue coming in, maybe you don't need the tariffs, Senator.
Though the tariffs add to the part of it. It's just amazing the tariff money we've got already. Don't get President Trump started on those tariffs. He loves them.
He sure does. And I appreciate your talking with us today. We'll let you get back to voting and what looks like a very late night, Senator. Thank you so much for being here on Bloomberg. Republican Senator Roger Marshall with us representing Texas. We thank you so much. And we want to head back to the studio here in Washington. Kaylee, back to you.
Yeah, and Joe, we want to update our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio with the other stories that we're following in today's Bloomberg Power Brief, including trade talks between the U.S. and Canada back on after a 3-day standoff over Canada's plan to impose a digital services tax on major technology companies. President Trump abruptly ended all negotiations with Canada on Friday over the new tax and threatened to impose even higher tariffs. Last night, Canada announced it would rescind the policy and would once again work with the Trump administration to strike a trade deal ahead of a July 21st deadline. The president's last-minute blowup over Canada's plans was emblematic of the uncertainty that accompanies his trade agenda. We got a fresh reminder of that today as the U.S. dollar fell 1.8%, dragged down by questions about U.S. tariff policy. It was the biggest first-half loss for the greenback since 1973. The Trump administration says Harvard University violated federal civil rights law in its treatment of Jewish and Israeli students on campus. In a letter addressed to the school's president, the government says Harvard will lose all federal funding resources unless adequate changes are made immediately. Before this escalation, there were signs tensions between President Trump and the university were easing. The Trump administration has already pulled more than $2.6 billion in federal research funding, threatened its tax-exempt status, and sought to prevent the enrollment of international students. And President Trump will host Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House 1 week from today. The Trump administration is expected to increase pressure on the Israeli government to strike a ceasefire and hostage deal with Hamas to end the war in Gaza. Netanyahu last visited the White House on April 7th. And now we go back to our top story. The Senate is mid-Vote-A-Rama on the president's one big beautiful tax and spending bill. And this morning on Bloomberg, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent shared what he believes will happen to the economy and the deficit as a result of the legislation.
We will get a big the boost in the economy from the tax bill. We're going to have certainty. We're going to go back to 100% expensing. So we are also deregulating at the same time. So we saw it in Trump 1.0. I think that we can see it here. So I think we can really accelerate the economy because the CBO model shows 1.8% growth, whether we have the biggest tax cut in history or we get this across the line and give companies and consumers great certainty.
And a new headline from Bloomberg today puts into context the one group that will benefit the most from the mega bill, the country's wealthiest, with the richest 20% getting an average $6,000 and $55 of an income boost, according to analysis from the Yale Budget Lab. And for a look into the numbers and who else could benefit, we're joined now by Natasha Sarin, president and co-founder of the Budget Lab at Yale University, who's joining us from World Headquarters in New York. Natasha, thanks for being here on Balance of Power. As we consider the legislation, knowing it is not yet in its final form, the Senate still has work to do on amendments and such things that could ultimately have an impact. What will the net effect be for the average American, as the president says that this will be the biggest tax cut in the history, at the very least, avoid the biggest tax hike in history for them?
So I've been listening to your segments, and I think that, first of all, sort of in aggregate, we need to have some truth on the facts about what the deficit impact of this legislation is going to be. What you are going to see as a result of the bill that's moving through the Senate that will then go back to the House is a $4 trillion deficit increase, and that's in the view of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. Our estimates at the Yale Budget Lab are very similar. So are those from the Tax Foundation. So are those from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So all of these groups are telling you one thing: this is a huge deficit increase. And then you have to ask the question, it's a deficit increase with the spending on who? And that's the work that we put out today, where we showed that if you look at the bottom 20% of the distribution, what is happening to low and middle income Americans in this country as a result of this bill is their after-tax income is actually going down. And the reason for that is because they're on the sort of losing end of those $1 trillion plus in Medicaid cuts and the decreases in food stamps that are being legislated from this bill. And so that money is being taken from them, in addition to deficit increases more generally, and is being spent on the top of the distribution. The top 1% is actually getting 5 times more than the bottom 10% is losing as a result of this bill. They're coming out about $30,000 ahead per family. And so it's very significant what these differences are. You're literally taking from the poor and giving to the rich as a result of this legislation.
But then can the rich, by extension, drive faster growth, Natasha? Because that is also the argument here, is that you have to account what stimulus this is going to provide to U.S. GDP.
Yeah, and the Congressional Budget Office has weighed in on this question, as have we at the Yale Budget Lab. And while it's true that when you have a big tax cut, a big package of tax cuts, you do see a boost to growth, especially in the short run. What we show in our analysis, and what the Congressional Budget Office also shows in their work, is that over the long run, over this 10-year budget horizon, the net impact on the economy and on growth is actually a negative one. And that's exactly because this significant deficit increase actually has the effect of ultimately slowing the economy and ultimately leading to inflationary pressures that are going to raise interest rates. And those two are going to be felt by American households, who are going to see mortgages be more expensive and their car loans be more expensive. And an important thing to understand about this legislation relative to, for example, in 2017, when Congress was considering the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is we're not talking in large part about the types of tax cuts that lead to those significant impacts on investment and growth. This really isn't a corporate tax bill in any meaningful way. If anything, you're seeing the rescission of a bunch of these green energy credits that are pretty important, at least to certain sectors of the economy. What this really is spending on the wealthiest individuals in the economy, who aren't going to then go out and spend that money. They're going to save it. And so the demand effect and the growth effect is going to be much less meaningful.
Well, and to your point about the overall debt burden as being something that needs to be considered in the ultimate growth outcome here as well, at a time where the president of the United States is actively pressuring the Federal Reserve to lower borrowing costs so that our interest payments are not as high. How quickly would that even have an impact if the Fed were to go ahead and cut 25 basis points? The president is arguing it would make a material difference in the amount we have to pay every year, but will it really?
So it won't. And also there's like another risk here involved in a bunch of what you're discussing between the Trump administration and Chair Powell, which is part of what makes this country so remarkable and exceptional and has aided and abetted our significant growth, especially relative to peer countries, is the fact that we have been very laser focused on respecting the independence of the Federal Reserve and allowing the Federal Reserve to be able to be reactive to its dual mandate of trying to think about inflation and trying to think about employment. And so another risk that we're running here is, in addition to the risk that we're running associated with this giant deficit finance tax bill, is that we're risking kind of breaking some of that special sauce with respect to giving the Federal Reserve the space that it needs and ultimately the credibility that it needs to be able to navigate the economy and ensure that we're in a stable place, not just for households, but for businesses to be able to make choices about investment.
Well, and the Fed, of course, is also waiting for further clarity on the administration's ultimate tariff policy, with that July 9th deadline looming, and a major question mark as to what the tariff rates will actually be set at. But that is another argument on the revenue side Republicans are making, Natasha, that you don't just consider the tax elements of this that are scored by the Congressional Budget Office. You have to count tariffs, which the CBO does not. Give us a reality check on that.
And so we've actually done that exercise at the Budget Lab at Yale, and there's a couple of points that are worth emphasizing. So one is that when you do that exercise, and when you also think about realistically, if you look at this package, a bunch of the sort of temporary tax gimmicks that exist here are very likely to ultimately be extended, just like we're in the process of extending a lot of the temporary tax gimmicks from the last tax bill in this package. And so if you take those two pieces, you take the fact that a lot of this is ultimately going to be made permanent, and you take the tariff revenue, even at current tariff rates, even though the president is saying we're actually going to negotiate, you're going to see 90 deals in 90 days, you still have a deficit increase. And the second piece that's really important is that we talked a little bit about who the winners and the losers from this bill are. Well, when you consider the fact that tariffs ultimately function in the economy as a regressive consumption tax, you're making this transfer from the poor to the rich even more pronounced, because what you're going to see at the very bottom, the bottom 10% of earners, is rather than losing $700 as a result of this bill alone, when you think about the tariffs, they're losing closer to $3,000 a year because they're going to face higher prices on every good that they consume. So there's both a distributional piece here that's important, but also a deficit piece.
And Natasha, as we consider and we continue to watch, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, we're taking a live look at the Senate floor where this vote-a-rama is still underway and, again, is expected to continue going for hours, potentially into the wee hours of Tuesday. As they go through this process, they do so with no guarantee it ultimately passes on the floor of the Senate or can repass in the House. Natasha, this is not a foregone conclusion that this legislation ultimately will become law. And that is what the president has warned against, this idea that come the end of the year, if these tax cuts are allowed to expire, it will be extremely detrimental for people all over the income spectrum and the U.S. economy. What if that were to happen? What would the actual effect be?
Well, so something that I think is important, and I heard Senator Tillis say earlier, is this Congress has time here with respect to trying to consider and trying to get to a position of both a better deficit outcome and a better distributional outcome before it hits some of these expirations towards the end of the year. So although it looks like this is moving very quickly, my hope is that some of the considerations that are being voiced with respect to concerns about what these Medicaid cuts are ultimately going to be for the most vulnerable members of society, and also the impact on what the deficit is going to be over the course of the next decade and even further out as a result of this legislation, are going to push in the direction of taking a beat and trying to reconsider and make some slightly different policy choices.
All right, Natasha, thank you so much for joining us. Natasha Sarin, president and co-founder of the Budget Lab at Yale. Thank you so much. And now we go back to my colleague Joe Matthew live on Capitol Hill.
All right, Kaylee, thank you so much. As we continue the coverage here with the Vote-A-Rama live on Capitol Hill, we're joined by Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who is also stepping off the Senate floor to join us right now as part of this process. It's great to see you, Senator. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio.
Great to be here.
Give us the state of play. It looks like we're going to be in for hours of this, potentially overnight into tomorrow morning.
I think you're right. It's going to be a very long night. Could well go into tomorrow morning. But at the end of the day, what we're going to do is prevent the largest tax increase that Americans have ever seen. This is a tax relief that Americans need. We're talking about a $4+ trillion tax increase that would be the case if it were allowed to not pass. If you think about it, it's a generational investment in our national defense. It's going to put us back on the path for energy independence as a nation. And most important, it's going to stimulate longer-term capital investment, which will beget growth. That growth will beget more employment. More employment will beget more economic activity, which means we're going to have higher tax revenues for the government as a result.
We've been talking about this for months and months,
yes.
Even longer than that probably, when it was just a concept on the campaign trail. Now here we are with all of these ideas together. What do you say to the Tom Tillises and the Elon Musks of the world who say, no, Senator, this is a debt bomb and we're doing more harm than good?
Well, I don't agree with their willingness to rely on authorities, I'm putting air quotes around that, like the Congressional Budget Office.
Okay.
The CBO missed the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's revenue result by more than $1 trillion. As a business person, I've been a business person my entire life. The type of capital investment that we're going to stimulate over the long term is definitely going to generate much more economic activity. And I think the models are wrong. I do not agree with the approach that has been taken that suggests this is going to be a big deficit bomb. In fact, I think it's going to be a growth generator that's going to put our deficit back on the curve in the right direction to reduce the deficit.
I'll tell you, if we find out the CBO was this wrong, seems like we should be rethinking the way that process works.
I am more than ready to do that, Joe. It's been quite frustrating to see numbers that just as a logical person, as a business person, clearly you say there's no way these calculations are right. What they leave out, what they don't include, the over-reliance on tax revenue, so to speak, when you know that companies and individual behaviors will change if taxes go up. The model does not work.
Well, if CBO turned out to be correct on this, along with a lot of economists who tell us that this is going to create $4 trillion in debt, would you support another reconciliation bill or another way to get to this? A deficit-cutting blue ribbon panel. I hate to be too cute, Senator, but how do we finally get to this issue?
Oh, I certainly support another one of these, these packages. We'll have an opportunity to do it again and again.
Okay.
If you think about the work that was undertaken by Elon Musk and the team at Doge, that's continuing. Every department head, every agency head has been charged with figuring out how to reduce the dramatic burden of regulations that was imposed just in the last administration. And to quantify that, over the past 4 years of Joe Biden's administration, that was an additional $1.4 trillion of compliance costs that were added to the U.S. economy. As that comes out, as these conflicting regulations, these burdensome, sclerotic regulations come out of the system, I expect to see that those funds, instead of going toward compliance, fall to the bottom line and get reinvested in the economy. Again, all very pro-growth.
You talk about unleashing energy. There's an effort here to slow down the ending of some green energy tax credits, and it seems to have the support, based on what we've learned here just since we've been up here this afternoon, of Democrats and Republicans, and in this case for solar and wind, to more align with the beginning of projects starting as opposed to their completion. Would you support that?
You're right. There's bipartisan support for that. However, Leader Thune is trying to thread a very difficult needle in terms of navigating through the Senate with 50+1 votes and having something that will work in the House of Representatives. So make no mistake, the leadership at the House of Representatives and here in the Senate have been working very closely together to make certain that we do thread that needle, that we're able to turn something over to the House of Representatives that convenes tomorrow at noon to set up the rules so that they can move this through the House, we can get it to the President's desk and get it signed by the 4th of July.
There's another effort to increase funding for rural hospitals in states like yours and all over the country here, but to pay for it with a new tax on people who make more than $25 million a year. Should that be law?
I'm very familiar with that effort as well. I don't think we're going to get there either.
No new millionaire tax.
There's not going to be a new tax, but I think that we're very concerned about rural hospitals, and we're looking for ways to address that right now.
Just not that way.
I don't think that's the way to get there.
Okay. You talked about this Rules Committee meeting. That's on the House side tomorrow morning,
Yes.
or tomorrow at noon.
That's right, Joe.
You need to get a lot done between now and then. How does this work tonight? Do you have a pre-dawn vote? What do you expect?
It easily could go that way. I've been here voting all the way through the night and into the next morning, but we will vote as long as it takes to get here. There's no time limit on this.
Right.
It really has to do with how long the Democrats want to continue to fight to put up their resistance movement again. They keep offering the same type of challenge over and over and over again. It's certainly dragging out the clock. I think what they want to do is get to prime time tonight. I've got to believe that their interest will wane after prime time hours.
So when the lights go out,
so we'll see how long
maybe a
it
vote
goes.
takes place.
I hope so.
What takes place in an office like yours on a night like this? Are you bringing in takeout? Are you guys hanging out on the floor? How do you get through an evening in the Senate?
So a large group of us will get together tonight. I think that Senator Cotton has been the one that's going to get to float this and foot the bill for it. But we're going to have Chinese brought in tonight, and we're just going to keep cranking through this.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad you could spend some time with us
to be with you,
in the
Jim.
middle of this process.
Thanks
Senator.
for coming here to the Capitol to see it.
We thought it was worth coming here to see this firsthand and talk with you, and we appreciate that. Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, we thank you so much. It looks like it's Chinese takeout tonight. Tom Cotton's got the bill, Kaylee.
All right, that makes me hungry as we're getting ready for dinner time as we close out Balance of Power here. And, of course, we're doing so with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. Rick, Stone Court Capital partner and Republican strategist. Jeannie, our Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, of course, you spent a great deal of time working in the United States Senate. What is your expectation about how the rest of this goes down, whether there ultimately will be the votes to pass and when that will happen?
Yeah, I think that one way or another it's going to pass. And you've alluded to a wraparound amendment. Sometimes those are used by leadership just to codify a bunch of things, knock out a few things that might have gotten in there that Republicans wanted to see stripped. And it's all predicated on having enough votes to pass. And so if they need to use a wraparound amendment, they'll do it. But that means that they've had to work overtime to get Republicans in line. And it sounds like, just from the interviews that Joe's been doing, there's still some disagreement on a few of these issues with these senators. But I think by tomorrow, everyone's going to be leaving for lunch and getting home for the 4th of July because the Senate's work will be done.
Well, of course, it's a matter of counting the votes to actually get them there. And we know of at least two pretty firm no's at this point. Jeannie, Rand Paul, who won't vote for a debt ceiling hike, and Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who announced surprisingly that he would not be seeking re-election next year as he kind of railed against this package. Take a listen.
I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. We're going to make sure that we fulfill the promise, and then I can feel good about a bill that I'm willing to vote for. But until that time, I will be withholding my vote.
So that's Tillis, Jeannie. What about Senator Collins, Senator Murkowski?
Yeah, we don't know yet. Senator Murkowski was able to get some sweeteners in there. Then the parliamentarian ruled at least one of those out. So I think it's still an open question how they vote. But I think what Tom Tillis is saying is something that a lot of people feel, which is that the president is either uninformed, which I don't believe, or he is breaking promises he made on the campaign trail, particularly as it pertains to Medicaid. And your really excellent interview with the head of the Yale Budget Lab was really telling, because this is what Tillis is talking about. This is a party and a president who ran as the party of the middle and working class. And yet you look at this bill, and it is giveaways to the top 1% and the wealthy, and it is taking from the lower and the working and the middle class. They don't want to admit that. They want to stress the budget. The border, and they want to stress defense. But you look at what they are cutting: food programs, Medicaid, those are energy. Those are things that benefit the middle and the lower class in particular, and they are on the losing end. So it suggests that this president and party are not being honest about what they said on the campaign trail is going to be reflected in their policies.
Well, Elon Musk certainly has thoughts about this too, Rick. He makes the return to rail against the bill, saying every member of Congress, this is on X, who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame, and they will lose every primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth. How much money do you think Elon Musk is willing to throw out in the name of revenge?
Well, we know his starter kit is about $250 million, which is not an insignificant amount of campaign cash. And look, I mean, here's a guy who's seen it from the inside. His mandate was to go cut waste, fraud, and abuse with DOGE, and he's kept sort of true to his word. He's left government in a huff because he feels like they've let him down. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of Republicans holding their nose and voting for this bill. We've heard a number of them tonight on the program saying, oh, no, we're going to grow ourselves out of these massive deficits. Well, we haven't grown out of a massive deficit in 50 years. And so why we think this is going to be unique is, baffling to me and, frankly, a lot of other folks who have been watching the federal government spending spree. So, I think you're going to probably see not only Elon Musk, but a lot of other people giving money to folks to try and beat a few of these guys who made promises they didn't keep.
Jeannie, just quickly, in 30 seconds, are we about to see the Musk-Trump feud reignite?
Oh, I hope so. Kaylee, the other thing he said was he called it the Porky Pig Party. So there's a lot to see on X today and yesterday from Elon Musk. And of course, the president, the last hour or so, has posted several times articles praising the bill. So we may see a feud break out.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, our political panel, thank you so much for joining us as the Senate continues to do its work. And Joe Matthew continues to be on Capitol Hill. And Joe, no sign yet that things are going to wrap up in the next few hours. This is going to go for a long time.
Yeah, they might be pulling out the cots here pretty soon. They're certainly making plans for takeout. Kaylee, there does seem to be a sense of resignation among the senators we've spoken with here this evening that they're going to spend the night here. We could be looking at an early morning vote, maybe pre-dawn. Very interesting as well, Kaylee, tonight to hear about some consensus forming around more money for rural hospitals on the back of a millionaire's tax. Whether that passes or not has yet to be seen, but this bill is still changing before our eyes.
Indeed. And of course, we'll continue to cover it for you here on Balance of Power in the Washington Edition newsletter as well. So check that out on the terminal and online. And Joe Matthew and myself will be back for more tomorrow right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.